Man, oh man. So much information about Willis O'Brien in this book. Especially the part about how he created Mighty Joe Young and a young Ray Harryhausen became his assistant. Who'd have thought that this would be the book to find so much information about Willis O'Brien?
Oh, hello everyone, Matthew Wolfstein again. You may have noticed I've gone through a physical change. Contact lenses and removed the mountain man beard. Well, I had family pictures on Sunday, so I had to get rid of the beard. Welcome to another installment of Movie Book Corner. As you can tell, I already got a good start on a book written by the late Ray Harryhausen and his friend Tony Dalton called A Century of Stop-Motion Animation. This book I've had for quite some time, and it's still incredible to read. I mean, let's go to my favorite section of the book, which is about the setup for stop motion. In this photograph, the bottom one, look at that. That's the entire Dynamation setup in one rare photograph. You have the Mitchell camera here, you have a glass plate, then you have the stop motion model, and then you have the rear projection. In fact, here's the diagram. This is what the diagram looks like that Ray Harryhausen would use. It's not just about Ray Harryhausen. In fact, we have a whole section dedicated to unknown special effects artists, and of course some that we have that are still alive today. Like, for example, Phil Tippett. See that image right there? If I can get it straight. That should look familiar. Yeah, Phil Tippett was the stop-motion animator for the AT-ATs in Empire Strikes Back. If you're a fan of stop-motion animation, if you want to know the history of stop-motion animation, definitely get this book. Next book up I have, it's a little bit weathered, but it's still informative. It's called John Wayne Treasures. I already took out, like, all this stuff in the back. I already took all that stuff out because I wanted to make it into, like, a big old movie archive box or something like that, kind of like what our library at UNM has, where it's like a big old thing. This is a very informative look at the man, the myth, the legend, John Wayne. Duke, as some people would call him. My favorite section talks about the Searchers. And I mean, if you've seen the Searchers, then you kind of get a good idea of what it is about. If you want to look at John Wayne's life, and if you want to just read about the man, definitely pick this book up. And behind me, I have much smaller books. So let's hold them up. So this is all the books right here. Brief History of Walt Disney, written by the same author, Brian J. Robb, who wrote a book called Brief History of Gangsters, and it's really good. This one's informative, has a few factual errors, but overall, it's a good book to pick up if you're a Disney fan. I got your book, Chris Stuckman. You're one of my favorite guys. You and Leonard Maltin are the guys I look up to. So, if you... don't open on me. If you haven't seen Chris Stuckman on YouTube, you should definitely give him a watch. He's very informative. He reviews movies by their different components. He doesn't just say, oh, this movie's good except for a couple things. No, he says, like, the cinematography is such and such. The editing is such and such. He's very concise with his movie reviews. And in his book, The Film Buff's Bucket List, he pretty much has movies that you have to see. And there's like some that I haven't even seen before, like Collateral. And he even has a poster of it in his basement. Don't believe me? Watch the YouTube video he did with John Flickinger. Coraline is also in here. Inglourious Basterds is also in there. I've seen it. Drive with Ryan Gosling. I have not seen that, but I'll definitely watch it. Snowpiercer with Chris Evans, which I haven't seen, but Good Bad Flicks talked about it. I mean, overall, if you want a good bucket list of movies to watch or rewatch, pick up this book. Next up is probably the most interesting book that I'm still reading through, called Orson Welles' last movie, The Making of the Other Side of the Wind. If you haven't heard the news about this movie, Orson Welles, as it says in the back, in the summer of 1970, legendary but self-destructive director Orson Welles returned to Hollywood from years of self-imposed exile in Europe and decided it was time to make a comeback movie. Coincidentally, the story was about a legendary self-destructive director who returns to Hollywood from years of self-imposed exile in Europe. Wells swore it wasn't autobiographical. It was supposed to take place during a single day and to be shot in 8 weeks. It took 6 years and remains largely unseen. This is probably the best informative look into what was going on in Orson Welles' mind when he was making this movie. It even has a couple of photographs, like for example, with Orson Welles right over there, he's starting to reach his age, and there's a young Peter Bogdanovich. You might remember him on a couple of TV shows now, but before he did that, he was actually a film critic who then became a director with movies like Last Picture Show, Targets, and so on. But then when he made At Long Last Love, people were like, what the heck are you doing, Bogdanovich? This is definitely an informative book. I'm like on the 82nd page. So if you want to know the history behind one of the most infamous unseen Orson Welles movies ever, pick this up. It's well worth the read. Scandals. All of us nowadays, we've heard of scandals. But what about scandals from the classic movie era? Unless if you're a film historian, you've probably heard of some scandals. But if you're a person who was born in the 90s, like me, and you've never heard of scandals, this book reveals all. Fatty Arbuckle. I'm pretty sure everyone knows about Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. But then they talk about Wallace Reed, Rudolph Valentino, Jean Harlow, Mae West, Judy Garland, Dorothy Dandridge, and then of course the long suicide of Montgomery Clift. That one's probably the most heartbreaking thing to read. And then same with James Dean. I think he was 3 years older than me when he died in 1955 when he crashed his Porsche. If you like film history and you like to know more behind the stars, then Anne Helen Peterson's book is definitely worth picking up. I highly recommend this. What do you know? A book about movies made in my home state. Jeff Berg, who lives in Santa Fe, he actually wrote this book, and one of my closest family members, my grandma Claire, she actually got this for me for Christmas, and I really like reading it. In fact, I always like reading this section because for my New Mexican film noir class, we had to watch this movie. It's called Ride the Pink Horse, directed by Robert Montgomery, who also stars in it. And it was taking place in Santa Fe, even though it is set in a fictional town called San Pablo. I've looked on a New Mexico map, and there is no San Pablo anywhere. This is definitely informative. It has a lot of different information about which movies were filmed where, and it also mentions that Breaking Bad was filmed here. If you want to know more about my state and the movies and TV shows filmed here, pick this book up. I highly recommend it. Yeah, I always say I highly recommend it because everyone should be able to look at these kind of things, you know what I mean? 3 more books. This one I got from my mother. Thank you, Mom. This is the Movie Night Trivia book, and it is exactly what it is. It's a trivia book. Like, for example, it'll have all these different little things right here, and you have to find out like which one is the correct answer. Here's where the true and false start. It's called the lightning round, and it has all these different little questions that you will say are either true or false or something like that. And once you're all done, you can rate yourself. So if you get like every single answer correct in this book, you're an expert in the cinematic arts. If you're sitting around at a table, bored with your friends who just so happen to like movies, pick this book up and test your movie knowledge. I want to know what results you get. The last 2 books I'm going to talk about are Walt Disney books. I actually bought this at Disneyland, and it's called Walt Disney, The Triumph of the American Imagination. This is almost like the most comprehensive biography about Walt Disney. If you want to look at like a really big, long history of Walt Disney, I highly recommend Walt, The Triumph of the American Imagination. Really fantastic book. And the final book is written by the late, great Bob Thomas. And this one I also bought at Disneyland. Walt Disney, An American Original. I actually like some of the photographs in here. Like, for example, remember this? Walt Disney receiving the special Oscar for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs with 1 regular-size Oscar statuette and 7 little ones. It still exists. It's in the Walt Disney Family Museum. I'll have to definitely go there and check it out. Remember that photograph right there? That's the animators for Bambi learning how to draw deer correctly. Because if you remember in Snow White, the deer looked like flour sacks. And they didn't want to do that for Bambi. So they actually studied a lot of animal anatomy so that way the animals in Bambi can look realistic. And my goodness, do they look realistic. Again, like I said before with all these movie books, I highly, highly recommend this book. That'll do for this installment of Movie Book Corner. Thank you everybody for watching. Again, like I've said many times before as a broken record, like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed seeing this video. Till next time, this is Matthew Wolfstein.